Hello everyone, hope you're well. Our topic will be aggregate demand supply and the price level. Let's go. So let's start with aggregate demand. What is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the quantity of final goods and services that individuals and organizations in an economy are willing and able to buy at each and every price, all other things unchanged. So what do we mean? We mean individuals and organizations are willing, so they want to, and are able, meaning they can, buy at each and every price. So this relationship, this price level and demand relationship is shown in this figure below. So if we have price level here on the vertical axis, and we have output or income, right? And we're trying to plot, what do we have? We have a situation that looks like this with our aggregate demand. So at higher prices, what do we have? We have lower quantity being demanded, and at lower prices, what do we have? We have more, a higher quantity being demanded. Wait, have we seen this before? Yes, we've seen this in our microeconomics. Remember? So with higher prices, demand is lower, and with lower prices, demand is higher. The same goes for individuals, organizations, and households. It's the same thing. When prices are lower, we can demand more. Okay? So the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping relative to price, meaning that more products are demanded in the economy as price falls. This is due to two things. First of all, the income effect. Okay, with lower prices, households and firms have more purchasing power, and so they can buy more. So the quantity demanded increases, and also due to the substitution effect. Okay, say for instance in the UK, which is in our example in this case, when the UK price level falls, individuals and organizations are more likely to buy UK products. So if prices of goods in the UK falls, prices of goods produced in the UK falls, individuals, households, organizations are more likely to buy made in the UK product, and so the quantity demanded of UK products increases. So we have this summation of the income effect and the substitution effect affecting aggregate demand. So aggregate demand that we've just shown depends on the price level, as we've shown in the previous slide. So prices are higher, aggregate demand is lower. Prices are lower, aggregate demand is higher. Household incomes. All things being equal, consumers will usually spend more if their incomes are higher. It only makes sense, right? I earn more, I spend more. A marginal propensity to consume, especially domestically, right? If my marginal propensity to consume domestically is high, aggregate demand curve would be very high and more elastic. Households and firms' expectations. If consumers are confident that they will keep their jobs or even anticipate a promotion or a pay increase, a pay rise, households may spend more now. So expectations affect levels of investment by firms and also spending levels of individuals. Aggregate demand also depends on government spending and the level of exports and imports. Let's start with government spending. So government spending is a capital injection into the economy, and an expansionary government spending can boost demand. How? Say the government is expanding spending on schools, hospitals, bridges, right? So what's going to happen is they're creating more jobs, they're spending more money. That will filter into the economy and boost demand. How about the level of spending on exports and imports? An increase in demand for exports will increase demand. So if people from around the world want more of what we export, of course that will increase demand, but more spending on imports will reduce it. So what's happening is we spend more importing from abroad, we're going to reduce demand in our own economy. The key thing to remember is aggregate demand is a summation of the factors in our national income accounting. So remember what we said, our GDP, our gross domestic product, is a sum of consumption, investment, government spending, exports, minus imports. That is key. So now that we finished with aggregate demand, let's talk about aggregate supply, shall we? So aggregate supply is the quantity of final goods and services that firms in an economy are willing and able to produce. Mark the word produce, at each and every price, all other things unchanged. So this relationship between the price level and supply is shown in this figure here. So we have price on our vertical axis, we have outputs, quantity if you like, and income on our horizontal axis. Now you find that our aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, right? So what does that mean? Prices are higher, more is being supplied. Prices are lower, less is being supplied. Right? We've seen this before with our normal supply curve, remember, in microeconomics? So the aggregate supply curve is upward sloping relative to price, meaning that firms can afford to produce more while their costs can be covered. So if prices are higher, our costs are going to be covered more, right? So we can use more to produce. So the amount supplied should increase if the price increases and lead to movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve, which is what we have here, right? Firms can afford to use less efficient means of production and pay more for resources because prices are higher. So just like we had in microeconomics, changes in the price level will lead to movement along the short-run aggregate supply curve. So we'll have movements up or down on this curve, right? Okay. However, there are other things that could affect aggregate supply. For instance, the level of technology and innovation in the economy. Okay? So think about it. With more technology and innovation, we can produce more at the same price. Okay? Also, the size of the labor force and its skills. If the size of the labor force improves or the skills of the labor force improve, we can produce more at the same price level. The amount and state of capital equipment, if we get more capital equipment, we can produce more, okay? Or better equipment. Also, the skill of management, okay? The skill of management to be able to combine resources and use them effectively, that could shift aggregate supply. And also the degree of entrepreneurship in the economy. If we're having more entrepreneurs who can produce more goods and services, okay, of course we can produce more at the same price. So we'll have a shift in the aggregate supply curve. Say more, and then we shift to the right. Now that we have talked about aggregate demand and aggregate supply, we can go on to talk about equilibrium in the economy. So, equilibrium in the economy will occur at the price and output for which the aggregate demand equals the aggregate supply. We've seen this before, right? In microeconomics.
The only difference is that here we are dealing with the aggregate supply, the aggregate demand, and the general price level for the whole economy as a whole, rather than the supply, demand, and price for just one specific market. Okay? So, equilibrium will occur where our price, it's our output, and everyone's happy. All right? And think about it. If we are below this price level, right? What will we have here? We'll have excess demand, so there'll be excess demand because prices are too low. And if we are above it, we'll have excess supply because prices are too high. Okay. Right. So there we have it. All right. Okay. Now that we've talked about the aggregate demand and we've covered the aggregate supply, we've also discussed equilibrium in the economy. Let's see what happens if we have an increase in aggregate demand. In other words, if our aggregate demand curve shifts to the right. Okay? So if we have a shift here, what happens? Now, if a government is focusing on increasing aggregate demand, so focusing on shifting our aggregate demand to the right, this is a kind of deliberate policy known as demand side policies. So demand side policies aim to shift our aggregate demand curve to the right. Okay? So how can we do this? Okay, how can we increase aggregate demand and shift it to the right? All right, now this may occur due to an increase in injections or a fall in withdrawals. Let's focus on the injections part of it. So we're injecting more into the economy. If there's an increase in consumption spending, an increase in government spending, or an increase in exports, this will increase aggregate demand and shift it to the right. However, if we also reduce withdrawals, so we decrease savings, we decrease taxation rates, or we decrease import spending, then there will be more to be spent in our local economy. So aggregate demand will shift from AD to AD1. Okay? And when that occurs, what happens? See, we're at a higher price level and there is more output, just like in micro equilibrium analysis. Okay, so an increase in demand here has led to higher prices and quantity availability. A fall would lead to the direct opposite. Okay, if a government, on the other hand, is focusing on increasing aggregate supply, we call that supply side policies. Okay, right? And what are some supply side policies? Say we have an increase in labor supply, or improvement in technology, or increase in investment. So anything trying to affect these, labor supply, technology, or investment, would affect the supply side of things, would affect our short run aggregate supply. Okay, and those are supply side policies. Good. Good. Now we can talk about the effect of an increase in aggregate demand in the short and long term. This is very important and very interesting, and I would suggest you pay full attention, please. All right. Now, what we usually do in economics is we use wage flexibility as an indicator of the economy. Why do we use wage flexibility? Using wage flexibility as an indicator, we assume in the short run, wages are fixed. So in the short run, wages are assumed to be fixed in an economy. Why? Because say you get a job, right? Or say you hire workers. What usually happens on your contract? You have a stated wage amount. So it's fixed in the short run, say for the first year, say for the first 2 years, say for the first 3 years, okay? So wages are fixed. However, in the long run, wages are assumed to be flexible. Okay, so after a while you've been on the job, you can go to your employer, you can say, you know what, the price level has changed in the economy, there's inflation, or I've worked on this job for a while, I've become better, I have better skills, I have more experience, I need more wages. So in the long run, wages are flexible. And we assume this in economics. Okay, now the importance of wage flexibility is analyzed below. So what happens? Say we're at this economy, right? And this is our price level, and this is our level of output and income. Okay, now we're already at equilibrium here. Okay, so this was our aggregate demand curve, this was our short run aggregate supply curve, and we're at equilibrium at P1, Y1, and everyone was happy. But then we did some demand side policies and increased our aggregate demand, and we got to AD2. Now what's going to happen? In the short run, wages are assumed to be fixed. So possibly because employees are locked into employment contracts, or maybe they don't immediately notice the prices have gone up. Okay? Think about it. Most of us only buy a limited range of goods, and we might not appreciate the overall inflation in the economy. All right, so what's going to happen? Employees are cheaper than they should be. However, over time, okay, so employees are too cheap, but over time, what's going to happen? Employees are going to say, listen boss, okay, we're at this new aggregate demand curve. We have had some demand side policies, aggregate demand in the economy has increased and prices have gone up. So boss, what you need to do is increase my wages. So contracts will be renegotiated, okay? And then this will increase the firm's cost and shift the short run aggregate supply curve upwards. In the medium term, this might shift to, say, SRAS2. So we're going to shift here now, okay? So first we shifted here, right? And now with wages being renegotiated, we shift here, okay? However, in the long run, what's going to happen? Employees are going to look around and say, hey, my cost of production has gone up, okay? So wages would compensate exactly for prices, okay? So this will mean we are going to shift our supply back to what it was at the original contracts. So we're going to shift our short-run aggregate supply curve in the long run from this illusion of a pay rise that we gave our workers from SRAS2 to SRAS3. So we're going to come back here, okay? And this is precisely where we were before, okay? So what has happened? Prices have risen from P1 to P4, but the level of outputs is exactly what it was before at Y1. We did increase to Y3, we did increase to Y2, okay? In the immediate short run, we increased to Y2, and then we got back to Y3, but then we're going back all the way to Y1. So what does that mean? It means the long run aggregate supply is fixed. In the short run, you could affect your aggregate supply, but in the long run, your aggregate supply is fixed. So changes in aggregate demand will change prices and not output. Once again, changes in aggregate demand, okay, would change prices but not output. Okay, good. So pretty interesting, right? Changes in aggregate demand change prices but not output. Interesting. The question, ladies and gentlemen, is how long is the long run? And will markets truly adjust in this way? So the question is how long the long run is and whether markets will truly adjust in this way. Now think about it. So we're saying in the long run, prices will change, but output will remain the same. The key is the labor market and how flexible money wages are. So if these adjustments are quick and efficient, both up and down, the economy should reach this long run situation rapidly. And the economy is on the long run aggregate supply curve most of the time. Okay, so we're adjusting quickly, right? We're adjusting from our aggregate demand 1 to our aggregate demand 2 to our new short run supply curve. And then when employees ask for more wages, we increase wages and we'll move to our new short run aggregate supply curve. And then in the long run, we go back to what it was initially, okay? Right? And a lot of neoclassical economists like Milton Friedman and Robert Lucas Jr. view the economy as always being close to full employment and the supply curve being vertical. So we're almost always already at this long run aggregate supply curve, okay? So no matter what we do, no matter how we adjust things, okay, we're always going to come here really quickly, right? So we're almost always close to it, right? Now, if this happens, then demand side policies are a waste of time, right? They're not that effective. And so governments should focus on supply side policies and on shifting the long run supply of the economy to the right. Pretty fascinating, right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget from microeconomics that the elasticity of supply is calculated by using the formula percentage change in quantity supply divided by percentage change in price. Remember that from microeconomics? You do that, you get your aggregate supply elasticity, okay? In this case, our long run aggregate supply elasticity. Now, what do we have here? In this case, we have a perfectly inelastic aggregate supply curve. Remember that? It doesn't change, okay? Now, neoclassical economists, extreme monetary economists, we call them, okay, would argue that supply is price inelastic and aggregate supply is always vertical at Y3. So that's what we've just seen. However, Keynesians would argue that the economy is likely to be stuck well below this potential output with an elastic supply curve, maybe even with a perfectly elastic supply curve that we have over here between Y1 and Y2. Why is this? Say the labor market does not clear rapidly, okay? So for long periods of time, we are below full employment. Wages are sticky, there's high bargaining power of trade unions, employees won't take pay cuts. So what will happen? Well, we're going to be stuck, right, with an elastic aggregate supply curve. All right. Now, this is the position of economists known as Keynesian economists after the work of John Maynard Keynes. Remember him? These people argue that the vertical supply curve might only occur in the very, very long run. But then, according to Keynes, in the long run, we are all dead. We can't wait for this, okay? So what do you have? You have this argument going on, some saying we're here on this long run aggregate supply curve that is perfectly elastic. Some say we're here, perfect inelasticity. But most economists would argue that we're somewhere in between these two extreme views. So maybe between Y2 and Y3 here, okay? So maybe we are somewhere there. And that is what most economists would argue. So, ladies and gentlemen, here comes the grand finale, the big reveal. Let's see what happens to the economy when we shift aggregate demand given different price elasticities of aggregate supply. Okay, let's see what happens if we are shifting aggregate demand in the economy. Okay, let's have our price on our vertical axis. Let's have our output and income levels on our horizontal axis. Now let's see what happens given different elasticities of aggregate supply. Let's play with our aggregate demand and see what happens. So, say we're at price level 1, P1, okay? And we shift aggregate demand from AD1 to AD2. Now look at what happens. This looks like we have a slightly price elastic aggregate supply curve. Look at it. It's somewhat flat, right? So that means it's elastic, as opposed to being vertical, which is perfectly inelastic, or somewhat vertical, which means more inelastic. This case we have elastic. Okay, now look at what happens. We shift aggregate demand from AD1 to AD2, so prices rise from P1 to P2. But look at what happens to our output. Output also rises from Y1 to Y2, but in this case we have greater effect on outputs than prices. Okay, and this is what happens if you adjust aggregate demand when you have a price elastic aggregate supply curve. You have more effect on output than prices. However, let's see what happens if our aggregate supply curve is more price inelastic, so somewhat vertical, here from AD3 to AD4. So we're at P3, and then we increase our aggregate demand from AD3 to AD4. What will happen? Prices will rise to P4. But look what happens to output. The increase in output is not that much. So what do we have? We have a greater increase in prices than output. Okay? Interesting. However, let's see what happens if, on the other hand, we adjust our aggregate demand. So we shift our aggregate demand when our aggregate supply curve is totally price inelastic. Okay? So see what happens here between P5 and P6. So we're adjusting aggregate demand from AD5 to AD6. Okay? So what happens? We increase aggregate demand here, but what happens to output? Output stays the same. It doesn't shift. Amazing. So when we have perfect price inelasticity, what's going to happen is only prices shift, only prices increase, and we have no effect on output. Amazing. Okay, so we only have an increase in prices, but output does not change. Fascinating. Pretty fascinating, right? So this means that if the economy is at its full potential output, at this aggregate supply curve here that's vertical, then an increase in aggregate demand from AD5 to AD6 will lead to an increase in the price level, a demand pull inflation from P5 to P6 without any increase in output. So our output stays exactly the same because we're already at full employment, full potential output. In other words, if an economy is at its full potential output, then an increase in aggregate supply would be more effective than an increase in aggregate demand. So in cases like that, you want supply side policies. So what are supply side policies? Supply side policies focus on changing the aggregate supply and shifting this to the right, hopefully. Okay, so to the right, we're getting more output and more income. Remember, going to the left is bad. That's less output and less income. So supply side policies focus on changing the aggregate supply and influencing the amount supplied in the economy at each and every price. So as illustrated below here, supply side policies aim at shifting the long run aggregate supply to the right, which means the government may want to increase the potential output of the economy. How can we do this? Maybe we can increase the labor supply. We can improve technology. Or we could increase investment. Okay? These should be able to shift our long run aggregate supply curve to the right. Okay? Say we increase the quantity of resources available, increase the quality of our resources, increase our efficiency. All of this should shift our aggregate supply curve to the right. Good. All right, finally, what's your class activity? Please draw a graph showing the effects of a shift in the aggregate demand on the economy at different aggregate supply elasticities. Okay, so you're going to have that. You're going to have your prices. You're going to have your output and income. You're going to have your aggregate supply curve. Okay, then you're going to have your demands. So what happens? It happens to output and price at different ADs. Okay. Okay, and on and on and on. It's even possible for you to have one that's perfectly inelastic. Okay, so do this and come to class, please. All right, be good, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.